Today's devotion is so cool. I love this subject, and I have titled today's devotion, Individual Impact of God's Suddenly. And we are on January 29th, or day 29 of the journey, walking through the Bible alphabetically, and I am so excited about today. The morning read says 2 Chronicles 28 through 30, and I want you to really hone in and focus on Hezekiah when he becomes king. So go ahead and pause and listen or read those chapters. So the featured verse of today is 2 Chronicles 29:36. Then Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over what God had prepared for the people, because the thing came about suddenly. So I want to talk about your individual impact and what God is doing in the big picture of things. But you as an individual have the ability to help God bring in a suddenly. I'm going to start with talking about your church. And is your church waiting for a quote unquote suddenly from God? Maybe it's a financial miracle, or maybe your leaders are longing for a revival in your city and they want to be used as a vessel for that. Sometimes it can seem like the wait will never end, but what we do in the waiting can prepare us for His answer. So preparing for what we long for will often include obedience in the little things. And I know sometimes I talk about obedience a lot through this year, but really these are ways and tangible examples of how our obedience can help us live our lives, as well as how it affects other people. So Hezekiah's prayer was for reformation of the temple worship. So when he became king, this became his primary focus. If you read in the beginning of this chapter, the first year and the first month, he began making change. He rallied the priests and the Levites to clean the temple, open up the doors, and to get it back in order. And this all happened in 2 Chronicles 29, 1 through 22. So there's 22 verses of all the things that he did really fast. I mean, like, he became king and started making changes. He reestablished sacrifice, which was an Old Testament approach to restoring a right relationship with God. He also positioned the Levites to praise and worship by returning musicians to the temple. I mean, some of the evil kings of past had removed all of that, shut the doors, taken it all out, and he was praying for reformation and restoration of the temple. And so he started returning the musicians to the temple. He assembled singers, and he brought back the practice of priests consecrating themselves and restoring tithing even. And once Hezekiah made the decision to rededicate the temple, the people in the city made this their focus as well, until everything was back to how God intended. And so he, one man, made all these changes in leadership, and it affected all the people, and their hearts were changed suddenly due to one man's heart. When we obey, God uses us to establish His ways, and the people will follow. Whether you're a leader of the sales team, or whether you're a leader of a family, or whether you're a leader of a ministry, you have the ability to change the hearts of the people that follow you because of your decisions and the way that you impact and the choices that you make. And Hezekiah did that. And the people under Hezekiah, they suddenly became united towards revival, and the true temple worship was restored. So let's talk about modern day. We as a church community should follow this example of unification for God's kingdom under our pastors. We individually play an important role in ushering in God's suddenly over our church, over our modern day temple, basically, or our church. We can set ourselves up And we can be a part. Our individual life can be a part of God's sudden blessing and sudden revival if we walk in obedience. So are we doing what we need to do to help usher in the suddenly for our church? Are we aligned with what our pastor is wanting? Growing up as a pastor's kid, I'll be honest with you, I didn't see all of the board meetings and I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, but I did know some of the vision that my dad would have. And I remember, sometimes my dad would feel alone and wonder, where are my people? And we can get tired in our ministry. And yet God never intended for our pastors to run a full entire church alone, or he never intended for the leaders to feel alone. And whether you agree with all of their decisions or not, that's kind of irrelevant if God has called you to that church. There's things that we as individuals need to step up and do in order to align with our pastor's vision. So do you know what your pastor's vision is? Our individual contribution is going to help exponentially bring in our churches suddenly that God wants to do. I love the word suddenly. And oftentimes when I have friends, they'll say, what's the word of the year for you? And there have been times in the past where I've felt like that year was all about suddenlies. And I can tell you that when we are in expectation of what God is going to do in a suddenly fashion, when we walk around with that expectation, then you never know what you're going to position yourself spiritually to receive. God wants to give us his suddenly, just like he did in Hezekiah's time. He opened up the doors and started reformation in 1 month, in just his very first month. God has something prepared for us. He does. He has something prepared for us, and he's waiting for us to obey. God's suddenly is ready. And I am so excited to hear about your suddenlies and the things that your pastor and your leaders want. And be sure and encourage them. I don't know what your individual contribution is, like what your individual impact will be of God's suddenly for your church, but this is specifically talking about your church and the leadership that you have over you, and what is your individual impact to bring that suddenly that God is so wanting to give. So today's challenge to dig deeper is to ask God for an opportunity to help bring in his suddenly for your church. Consider how much faster your church would be blessed if you would jump on board and join with their vision, whether that's serving more or whether that's, giving more to the vision. I mean, if God is nudging you to do more for your local church, then answer that call today. Don't waste time. Today is your day to begin making individual impact for God's suddenly for your church. Today is that day. Are you supposed to start going to church? I mean, do you not attend church yet? Find a church that is in your area. And I know that as a pastor's kid, I've heard so many times where the church hurt me, or there were people in the church that hurt somebody and then they would switch to another church or whatever. I'm telling you, I get it. I understand. I walked through times where there were events that occurred that completely hurt my family. Yet here I am encouraging you to find a church. We're all imperfect. I once heard a pastor say, if you are looking for a church that is not hypocritical, then the church will be empty because we will all have to turn around and leave. And so I'm encouraging you, if you are not in a church right now, please consider joining one. Please consider getting involved. And if you are a part of church, but you're not consistent going there every single Sunday, I would encourage you to make the commitment today that you are going to start going to church, because your individual impact will make exponentially so much more ability and afford the opportunity for God to bring in his suddenly for the community. And isn't that what we are supposed to be doing? We're supposed to impact the world around us. Who knows what life you are going to change by your physical presence in the church every single Sunday. And so I'm praying right now that God will show you how your individual impact could usher in God's suddenly for your church. Your challenge for today is to ask God what that is. How can you as an individual person impact your church even more? So tonight, when you pull out your journal and when you reflect on this question, I want you to write down your pastor's vision. And if you don't know it today, part of your challenge is to find out what it is. But what is your pastor's vision? Or if you don't attend locally to a church, then make an effort today that this Sunday you're going to visit a church. When you reflect on this, ask what your pastor's vision is and what you are going to do individually. So write it down so that God's suddenly for your church comes to life faster because you have a voice and you have impact in His kingdom. I hope this encouraged you, and I hope that you were inspired but yet challenged, maybe even convicted of growing a little bit more this year, and this is one way to do it. And if you're watching this podcast via my YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast and you don't have the printed copy yet, you can look in the show notes for the link, and you can also go to anitacordell.com and order it from there. And I want to hear from you, and so I want to know what your impacting is and what you are learning from this. So until tomorrow, keep rinsing, reflecting, and repeating. God bless you.